Hello there. This article is going to test my patience. So it's a bit of a slow news day. I decided to find something a bit off the beaten path for me and tackle the issue of transgenders in female sports. This is The Conversation, which is a Canadian periodical, I suppose, since it receives funding from the Canada Periodical Fund, which provides financial assistance to Canadian print magazines, print community newspapers, and digital periodicals. Obviously, it's funded by the Trudeau government. So if it's government funded, surely it can't be anti-science, right? I mean, we are all here to believe in the science. That's what I've been told. So the Alberta government, led by Premier Danielle Smith, recently tabled 3 bills that, if passed, could restrict the rights of transgender people in the province. These proposed policies are not only anti-trans, but anti-evidence. Oh dear, that sounds very serious. One of these is Bill 29, the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act. If passed, it would require school boards, post-secondary institutions, independent academic institutions, and provincial sports organizations to establish athlete eligibility policies to protect the integrity of female athletic competitions by ensuring women and girls have the opportunity to compete in biological female-only divisions. Okay, I don't see the problem with women competing with other women, as opposed to competing with men. Well, the government calls the bill a balanced approach that would also ensure transgender athletes are able to meaningfully participate in the sports of their choice. However, this legislation would task organizations with excluding transgender and gender diverse people from fairly and equitably participating in sport. What does that mean? That someone who decides that they are the opposite gender would still have to participate with their biological gender, I assume? And this is bad. Why? It would also prevent transgender people from taking legal action against the government, institutions, or individuals responsible for implementing discriminatory requirements. It's not discrimination to require you to compete based on your biological sex, surely. Bill 29 has sparked significant concerns. Advocacy organizations are pointing to how it would violate citizens' fundamental freedoms. Ah yes, the freedom to punch women as a man, which I'll get to later. Youth Sports, the governing body for Canadian university sports, has stated it is unlikely to bring future championship competitions to Alberta if the bill becomes law. So it seems as though the government is on board with what this periodical is saying, online magazine, whatever it is, The Conversation. The myth of biological advantage. Let's hear it. Legislation like Bill 29 is based on a widespread myth that transgender women have an inherent biological advantage that threatens the integrity and fairness of women's athletic competitions. This myth is not based on fulsome scientific and socio-cultural evidence. What's socio-cultural? Never mind. Let me see this. National Library of Medicine from the US. Study on transgender women in the female category of sport. Let's see what they have to say. We report that the performance gap between males and females becomes significant in puberty and often amounts to 10 to 50% depending on the sport. The performance gap is more pronounced in sporting activities relying on muscle mass and explosive strength, particularly in the upper body. Longitudinal studies examining the effects of testosterone suppression on muscle mass and strength in transgender women consistently show very modest changes, where the loss of lean body mass, muscle area, and strength typically amounts to approximately 5% after 12 months of treatment. Thus, the muscular advantage enjoyed by transgender women is only minimally reduced when testosterone is suppressed. I see. So the NIH, National Health Institute, is apparently peddling misinformation and against the science, according to Canada. Also, they seem to be very against reality, something that I might have gone off about last video. But this is what I meant. It's just the left has left reality, and now they are railing against biology with all their might. So it says here, while some scientific studies argue transgender women have an advantage, researchers have shown these studies are often methodologically flawed and use limited biological data. For example, studies rarely adjust for height and lean body mass and make a false equivalency between testosterone levels and athletic performance, despite there being no consistent evidence testosterone levels predict performance. I see. So you can take testosterone hormones as a man in athletic competitions, right? It's fine. It's not called doping, right? It's not illegal, right? Oh, wait. Never mind. Anti-trans sport policies are bound to fail because the idea of two sexes, like two genders, is a social construction and not a biological fact. We don't have two sexes. And notice, it's not gender identity. Biologically, we don't have male and female. This is a social construct. This is the official Canadian government position now? Maybe. I mean, they seem to be supporting the opposition of this bill that says otherwise. And they also seem to be funding this periodical that says so. So maybe, is it Trudeau's official position? There are no two sexes. The male and female are a social construct. What can I say? This is what I have to work with, honestly. Humans have significant biological variations, and there are no strict measures that can determine maleness or femaleness. There are no... Do you know chromosomes? XX and XY? No? Never mind. In addition, there is no direct and consistent research to show that transgender women or transgender men have an athletic advantage in sport. Anti-trans policies like Bill 29 rely on flawed scientific studies and, despite using the language of fairness, ignore research that demonstrates how trans people, and especially trans women, are disproportionately affected by health, economic, and social disparities. Blah blah blah. That's all I gotta say. It's all nonsense. The trouble with categories. Transgender people's participation in sports has become a key culture war issue and a political lightning rod not only in Alberta and Canada but elsewhere in the world. Bill 29 stems from a long and ongoing history of policing women athletes' bodies. The women's category was created because of the historical exclusion of women from competitive sport, etc., etc. They just can't help themselves. Now, what do they want done? And this is interesting. The male and female categories in sports do not reflect the diversity of gender or biological sex and are based on limiting beliefs about our bodies. It is time to meaningfully consider what it would mean to re- or uncategorize sport. Recategorizing sport could include renaming gendered, sexed categories. This approach moves away from gendered language while recognizing the barriers that women, girls, and people of other marginalized genders experience in sport. I'm sorry, you're just railing against gendered language and then wanting to protect groups depending on gender. How are you so hypocritical and inconsistent? One option is to rename the men's boys category to open and the women's girls category to women, girls, and gender diverse people. So just wipe away the idea of male and then have female and gender diverse as the only gendered language remaining. I see. The former would be open to people of all genders, while the latter open to people who are women, /girls, cisgender and transgender, transfeminine, non-binary, gender diverse, transmasculine, and trans men. So essentially, any guy can just go in there, claim to be non-binary, despite not taking any hormones or doing anything to stop appearing as a traditional man, and just win it, right? With 10 to 50% performance advantage, depending on the sport. You just go in and you win, right? Interesting. Uncategorizing sport could mean removing gendered categories altogether. Some sports, such as quad ball, do not use gendered/sexed categories. This sport only considers gender identity and uses a maximum gender rule for how many players of one gender can be on the field at once, which is useless. You'd end up having teams entirely composed of biological males identifying as different genders, because that's the best team you can field because of the biological advantage that men have. Lack of specific gendered language creates space for all players of all genders to participate. While an imperfect model, players are still required to share their gender, it provides another way of thinking beyond the binary. Why do you even need all of these categories? Just have one category for everyone and say gender doesn't exist. Just go all the way with your nonsense. It's just so inconsistent. The only Olympic medal you can achieve is in mental gymnastics. Now, this is another interesting research, basically saying sex is a major factor influencing best performance and world records. Results suggest that women will not run, jump, swim, or ride as fast as men, because essentially this research is tackling the idea that the gender gap in sports performance will close over time, which is something that, you know, all sorts of feminist quackpots posited as a possibility. It's wrong. This is again National Library of Medicine, NIH. These are some examples of what happens when you're stupid and allow men to compete against women. Female volleyball player, 17, left paralyzed with brain damage by transgender opponent who tackled with the right after knocking her to the ground. Yeah, that doesn't sound very nice. Volleyball player left partially paralyzed by a transgender opponent slammed the Olympics over its boxing controversy. So it's really strange that this was allowed, but it's not the only time. This is from the Telegraph. The BBC apologizes after interviewing transgender athlete who boasted of violence against women, retired MMA fighter Fallon Fox. And basically they're saying if we knew that this person was so hateful towards women, we wouldn't have been so welcoming and complimentary when we interviewed them. She tweeted, "For the record, I knocked out 2 out. One woman's skull was fractured." Yeah, that was the female boxer that had her skull fractured by this guy, transgender. The other not. And just so you know, I enjoyed it. She, whatever says. See, quote, "See, I love smacking up turfs in the cage who talk transphobic nonsense. It's bliss." Unquote, end quote. This is Miss Fallon Fox. Yeah. And basically, what do the BBC have to say for themselves? "We would have conducted the interview differently. Fox should never have been booked and an on-air apology is required." Fair Play for Women and Women's Sport campaign group wrote to BBC. This week, the corporation climbed down with the BBC complaints unit, saying it was unaware of previous comments made by Fallon Fox, and if it was, they would have conducted the interview differently. Right. Essentially, they're not denouncing Fallon Fox, they're not apologizing for conducting the interview, they are just saying we wouldn't have been as complimentary, that's all. Let's face it, the mainstream absolutely adores allowing these people to get in the ring with women, and they don't care when women are hurt, they don't care that women are not given the fair opportunity to compete, they don't care that women spend in order to be an Olympic athlete, their entire lives training, and then are edged out by people with a biological advantage that they never had a chance against, and essentially they lose out. And you know, these transgender athletes are going to set records, have already in fact set records that no woman ever in history will be able to compete with. They basically just made it impossible for women to compete in their own sports. This is insanity, and the thing is, it's going to be absolutely draining female support for these policies. It already has in some places. In Canada, it might take longer, but it will eventually happen. Just like it did in the US. Go back a couple of years, people were very much all in favor of intersectional feminism and being trans allies. And a couple of years later, you now have people no longer being patient with these new policies that absolutely make no sense and are detached from reality. This is not hatred towards trans people. This is simply stating the fact. The science is settled, as the left likes to say. There are biological differences and biological advantages for males over females in sports, depending on the sport, it changes, but in most sports, in the overwhelming majority of sports, males have the advantage, and it's quite significant enough so that women can't compete against men. That's the truth of it, the basic biological truth. And anyone saying otherwise is either gaslighting themselves or you. And that's my personal opinion. And it's backed by the science, it's backed by the NIH. It's so stupid. You just quoting government data is becoming more and more dangerous to do online. hopefully, when Trump comes in, we will no longer feel that way. But honestly, if I tried to tell you government data on certain types of medicine right now, there's a lot of new, very interesting information I can't share with you on YouTube. At least when it comes to this issue, I believe I can. We'll see if this video gets demonetized or a warning or something. But I believe I can speak this much. It's just sad. I mean, all of this was so unnecessary. Things were fine 10 years back, 15 years back. It felt as though we were getting close not to equity, but to an egalitarian society, which basically says everybody gets an opportunity. Everyone gets equal treatment under the law. And we're going to try and give the people who were born to unfortunate families, to poverty, etc., we're going to try and give them a bit of a leg up so that they have at least some chance to compete, to make something of themselves. And essentially, we just do away with racism and sexism and all of that, and just try to be colorblind and treat everyone fairly based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin or other superficial characteristics. Now, obviously, we still recognize the gender differences, but we try to give everyone a chance and to just be polite and positive. And then this entire, intersectional nonsense came in, and basically everyone divided into groups and started hating every other group. And especially everybody hated straight white males, which basically held civilization together for so long. Like, if you look, pretty much all the technology that you're enjoying was invented majorly by them. The people who they keep saying that slave labor built America. That's not true. Check the actual facts. It's just the how to put it, the entire idea of all of the gender diverse stuff didn't even exist until a couple of years back. You had like 99% of people were straight, and in most Western countries, like over 90% of people were white until a couple of decades ago, like 2-3 decades ago. So obviously they were the ones who did everything, and everything was in their image. Just like if you go to China today, everything is Chinese. All of the people in all the commercials, all of the writers, everything. And if you go to Africa, you'll get black people. If you go to the Middle East, you'll get Muslims, usually Arabs. It's the majority. The overwhelming majority of the population is that way. Therefore, what they create is in their own image. It's normal human behavior. And just before all of this division, we were doing perfectly fine. There were already like female characters and black characters in all sorts of movies and video games and comics and everything. It's just nobody decided to hate on black characters just because they were black, or female characters because they were female. I remember watching X-Men as a kid and really liking Storm, despite the fact that she's a black woman. I don't see myself in her. She had cool powers. She could fly and she could control the weather. I thought that was very cool, despite the fact that you had male characters like Cyclops or Wolverine, or Gambit, I liked her powers more. I thought controlling the weather and flying around seemed really cool. Lightning and snow and ice, sure. As a kid, I enjoyed that. But now we no longer have that anymore. Instead, everything is exceedingly divisive and derisive of anyone of another group. It's a shame. Think about growing up in this environment and just constantly being on guard and hostile. What we're doing is so wrong. We absolutely destroy what we've inherited, and history will judge us for it. And it's not even something that we really can even attribute to ourselves that much. It's all coming from the top down by certain very large corporations and government agencies that just decided to slowly inject this identity into our culture. And no matter how much we reject it, it still happens. And in the end, I guess our major fault is not being on guard enough against large corporations and government and allowing them to do this. Although I'm not sure if it's even that much of a fair criticism, because you can't be on guard against something that you're not aware of. And this is something that I don't think has happened in history before. Usually when you had governments go bad, it was more along the lines of become tyrannical and less along the line of create all of that sort of toxic culture that causes people to go insane and attack each other. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully we are pushing back and gaining ground with the election of Trump, and with the failure of pretty much everything woke these days, and successes of things that aren't woke, although it's a real shame that it's mostly Asian stuff, because I really enjoyed Western entertainment, Western culture, and I wish we weren't as dependent on the East. Not that there's anything wrong with Eastern entertainment, it's just, especially things that come from China, I would rather not be dependent on the Chinese Communist Party, which, in my opinion, is a very authoritarian and dangerous regime. That said, they do create good entertainment sometimes, much better than what the West does. Thanks for watching, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.